We'll get that edited together. Okay, so on so in the 40th verse 40, I want to know why I said it that that way. In verse 40, what you have is a command to take the boughs of goodly trees, the branches of palm trees, the boughs of thick trees, and the willows of the brook. We're going to break down the lulav a lot more in that, but that's basically where the command comes from. And you shall rejoice before the Lord for 7 days. So it's a 7-day festival. You can see that also in Numbers 29:12. You can see that in Deuteronomy 16:15. And it says, you shall dwell in booths for 7 days. Booth is Sukkah. So the plural of that is Sukkot. So booths or tabernacles is the word that's being used there. Now, in verse 42, it says that all that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. We'll come to find later that it's not restricted to them. However, it is a commandment specifically for those who are Israelites. And the reason for this, you gotta love when Scripture gives a reason for the commandments that we're following. That your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So, after the plagues and the Exodus, then when dwelling in the desert in the Sinai, that was an opportunity for them to dwell in booths, in Sukkot, in temporary dwellings when God sustained them. So, Numbers 29:12 through 40 more specifically describes the sacrifices that are made on this day, because this was, of course, a yearly festival as much as it is a commemoration of a specific time. So, basically, Passover works a lot that same way, right? There was there's a commemoration of the initial day on which it started, as well as a yearly reminder of different things that happen. So when we do the offerings, when we don't do the offerings. When the offerings were made for Sukkot, what they would do was they would have 13 bulls. This is day 1. 13 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, and 1 male goat for a sin offering. The others were a burnt offering. The 1 male goat is for a sin offering. And there are, the bulls each have 3/10 of a grain offering of a flour mixed with oil. The rams each have 2/10, and the male lambs each have 1/10. So there are 5/10 of a grain offering with each one of these burnt offerings that are being made. Day 2, it knocks it down a little bit on the bulls. So we have this kind of descending number of bulls that are being offered every day. On day 2, it's 12 bulls. On day 3, it's 11 bulls. On day 4, it's 10 bulls. All of these with the same 2 male rams, the 14 male lambs, and the 1 male goat. Day 5 has 9 bulls. Day 6 has 8 bulls, and day 7 has 7 bulls. Now, day 7 is the last day of the full 7-day feast, and so at that point, then by the time that last of the 7 bulls would have been sacrificed on the 7th day, 70 bulls were sacrificed in total. Okay, so there was 70 bulls, 14 rams in total, 98 male lambs, and 7 male goats. And on the additional of the 8th day, there was a sacrifice made of 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 lambs, and 1 goat. Okay, so you get a total of 10 animals sacrificed on that day. Interestingly enough, Mishnah records, Rabbi Elazar said, these 70 bulls that are sacrificed as additional offerings over the course of 7 days of Sukkot, to what do they correspond? They correspond to the 70 nations of Israel and are brought to atone for their sins and to hasten world peace. Why is a single bull sacrificed on the 8th day assembly? It corresponds to a singular nation, Israel. You can find that in Sukkah 55b. The interesting thing is it goes on to say, Rabbi Yochanan said, woe unto the nations of the world that lost something and do not know what they lost. When the temple is standing, 70 bulls that are sacrificed on the altar during the festival of Sukkot atones for them. And now that the temple is destroyed, who atones for them? interesting. He says, "Woe to the world," and we in the hope of Yeshua are those who just are praying for those of our Jewish brothers and sisters to be able to acknowledge that that there was one sacrificed that atoned for them that is even greater than the 70 bulls offered on this day. These days, I should say. Now, Sukkot is a harvest festival. It's the festival of ingathering. And in Deuteronomy 16:13, it's referred to as the Feast of Ingathering. In Exodus 20, it's a harvest festival. You can see that, I believe it's in Exodus 23:16, where it's referred to as the Feast of Ingathering. It's not even referred to as the Feast of Booths. That's only Exodus 23 so far. Now, the ingathering, specifically of corn and wine, this was something where it said that sons, daughters, servants, Levites, strangers, orphans, widows, and inhabitants are to rejoice. Everybody's having a good old time on this day, right? Okay, so there are 7 days of feasting, and this is prophetic of the final ingathering that we'll find of believers, that Isaiah 23:12 through 13 says, "And it shall come to pass on that day that the Lord shall beat off from the channel of the river unto the stream of Egypt, and ye shall be gathered one by one, O ye children of Israel. And it shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mountain at Jerusalem." Now Jeremiah 23:7 through 8 says, "Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, The Lord liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but the Lord liveth, which brought up the children which led the house of the seed of Israel out of the north country, and from all the countries whither I had driven them, and shall dwell in their own land." So we're not even going to say, "Oh, this is the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt, O Israel." We say that all the time. You see that all the time in Scripture. But this is going to be, "Blessed be the Lord who brought his people out of the northern country and brought them to dwell in their own land." This is the celebration of Sukkot. It's why it's such an awesome feast and why we're so happy about it. Now, 3 times a year, there is a special thing that happens, that there are specially prescribed feast days wherein everyone is meant to go to Jerusalem. That specifically is meant to happen on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Passover, and the Feast of Weeks, which is Shavuot, and the Feast of Tabernacles, which is Sukkot. Deuteronomy 16:16, Exodus 23:16, and 34:22, Exodus 34:22 and 23 all allude to that. So you can go see that in Scripture. Zechariah 14:16 says, "And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came up against Jerusalem shall even go up year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." So in the New Jerusalem, all the nations, even everyone that is left of the nations which came up against Jerusalem, they too will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Come on out. So, Sukkot actually became known as the feast. 1 Kings 12:32, "And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month." Now, this is an interesting part of the history in Israel, technically. Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month. That's the 8th day of so it's the following month, like unto the feast that is in Judah. And he offered upon the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. So if you remember, when Israel split off from Judah, Jeroboam went and made golden calves, and he set them up in Bethel and Dan, I believe. And that was where apparently he reinstituted an 8-day festival similar to Sukkot, where they're offering to the calves. Now, the only reason we point this one out, not only because of its significance in kind of mentioning Sukkot, but it's referred to as the feast. So it's something where it colloquially it was like, that's the big one, which is kind of ironic considering that in a lot of modern Judaism, Sukkot is completely overlooked these days, which is, yeah, I don't know, no other word but ironic. Now, every 7 years, which would have been at the sabbatical, on Sukkot, the law was to be read publicly. So in Deuteronomy 31:10-13, and Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, and in the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel is to come to appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, thou shalt read this law before all the Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn, and the fear of the Lord your God, and observe to do all the words of this law, and that their children which have not known anything may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, as long as ye live in the land whither ye go over the Jordan to possess it. Okay, so that's what we're doing. That's why we're here. The other side of that then is how do we celebrate this day? Most importantly, the big one, of course, that everybody's going to be doing is building and dwelling in the Sukkah. So what we do, the Sukkah really doesn't have a lot of parameters. There are a few things that are considered the requirements to have a kosher Sukkah, okay? And even then, I would encourage you to do what you can, find a Sukkah, and just find a way to dwell outside, even if it's not technically the kosher Sukkah. Because yes, step one, put it outside. Sometimes it's fun to get the kids and build a fort inside, but know that that's not the only thing you should be doing. Now, the walls technically can be any material. There isn't a whole lot that is prescribed in that. I've heard that it should be walls that the wind can move through, and that a roof that you can see the stars through. And then you look at the Chabad ones, and those walls don't move at all. So I've heard some conflicting things. The walls apparently don't have as many I don't know how I should say standards as say the roof, which specifically does need to be made of what's called sechach. That would be a raw, unfinished vegetable matter that's commonly bamboo poles, evergreen branches, reeds, corn stalks, or unfinished lumber. Something that we actually, like I said, when we get our other walls up, I kind of plan to just go trim the tree a little bit and throw some of the branches up on top. So we'll make that work here soon. Oftentimes it's going to be decorated with natural looking things. Some people take real or plastic fruit and will hang that from the top. You can see I've got my garland of fake leaves up there, and we'll just kind of call that good for now because it looks pretty, right? The point is for you to have a temporary dwelling and to dwell in it. So what are we supposed to do in the Sukkah? First off, there's a Lulav. Ooh, and this is what I meant. Hey, Nico, you want to bring the Lulav?
It's still wrapped up.
We can put it together, right? Okay. So we'll put together the Lulav. Go ahead and bring the pieces. I'll just do it as part of the video. Okay. So Nico's going to bring out the Lulav set, and we'll put this together. Why not? Oh, thank you. Oh no. Dropping pieces.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
I'll take this away for just a minute.
So, okay. Step one, get yourself the Eitz Hadar, the fruit of the beautiful tree, of the glorious tree, of the Hadar. What else does Hadar translate to? Glory really is a good one. beautiful. So, here we have the etrog, and it's good because this one has the stem attached, which is considered good. Even how bumpy it is. So this is a very nice etrog. Wow. Like the bumpier the better on an etrog, frankly. So that's kind of how it's considered to be really good. Now, this is the fruit that they have determined is the traditional one. The fruit of the glorious tree, basically, is how it's pre-Eitz Hadar, how you'll see it rendered in Scripture. And then you take the Kafat Tamarim. So this is the palm branch. And even it has like it figuratively is like spread forth like a palm, which is kind of interesting. This one needs fresh from Israel, just coming out of the package here. So it says this one isn't spreading like some others. I'm sure it'll loosen up as it dries out a little bit over the next couple of days. But yeah, we'll kind of want to let this one. There we go. I'm just kind of knocking it out so that you can see how it's going to spread. See? So we've got our palm branch, and it comes with this container into which we're going to put the other pieces. So we've got the myrtle, Anaf Eitz Avot, the leaf of the bough trees, the Hadass. If you'll notice, Hadassah is Esther's name, and that means myrtle tree. Hadass. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about each one of these as we go. Now, this one comes with a couple different branches here. Come on out. This one has 3. 1, 2, 3. And that's going to be slid into the side here, so that gets tucked there into its little holder. Oh my goodness, it smells so good. That myrtle, wow, that smells really good. The etrog didn't smell that good coming out of the package. It's a little too cold, but wow, that smells amazing. And then the willow, Arbe Nachal, is the willow branch. And so each of these have different colloquial teachings, and I'll break them down for you because I found a few different things in different spots. Particularly one, I don't want to strip the leaves off of this, but I can't get the bottom out of it. So the etrog is said to resemble the heart. And the letters of the word etrog, so which I believe is spelled Aleph, Tav, Rosh, Vav, Gimel, that actually those break down to make an acronym for a poetic form of the verse, "Let not the foot of pride overtake me," which is Psalm 36:12, suggesting the humility that we should hold in our hearts. Okay, so here's our willow branch. This is the willow of the brook. This is the 4th one. And we're going to slide this into the other side here. They're a little damp because they've been kept in their package to be made fresh. And now that it is Sukkot, we will bring them out and wave them in the sukkah. So, we've got our lulav put together here, and it's so the etrog is said to resemble the heart. The date palm, okay, so the middle palm branch here, is said to resemble the spine, and if you break it down, lulav, right, is lamed vav lamed vet, and that lamed vav in and of itself would be to him, and lamed vav is the word heart, lav, lev. So it's to him and to his heart. You can get kind of a rabbinical teaching of a breakdown in there. So they say that the one who loves the Lord with all his heart, to him it is given the strength to stand uprightly, to stand tall in his spine, right? Okay, Hadas, the myrtle, corresponds to the eyes, and it's kind of because of the round almond shape of the leaves. Therefore, they signify enlightenment and vision. And the willow is meant to represent the lips, so you can kind of see the long mouth type shape there, and they're meant to represent the service of the lips, which is prayer. So then, another teaching that you can take from each of these, the etrog corresponds to it doesn't respond to anything. The etrog corresponds to Psalm 104:1. You are clothed in glory and majesty. Glory being the word that is the hadar of the beautiful tree, right? And then the palm corresponds to Psalm 19:13. The righteous bloom like the date palm. Myrtle corresponds to Zechariah 1:8, and he stood among the myrtle trees. And the willow corresponds to Psalm 68:5. Extol him who rides on the clouds, the Lord is his name. Clouds being kind of a play on words that sounds like arava, which is the word for willow branch. So there are also a few things that you can pull from, like my loving the fragrance of the myrtle there. With each one, now colloquially, taste would represent learning. You know, if you would eat the scroll and find something sweet, and that your scripture would be sweet to my lips. And then smell represents good deeds, like we want our deeds and our sacrifices to be of a good aroma to the Lord, right? So the etrog has both taste and smell. It's kind of like a lemon. It's a citrusy plant, the citron. Ooh, there we go. I got a good little juicy bit out of there. It smells amazing. Okay. And you can eat this later on if you want to, after you've used it for the service. It's okay. Then the lulav, which is the word for the date palm. So the whole thing we call the lulav, but technically the date palm is really the lulav part of it. This has taste, but no smell. You could eat this and it would taste like something, but if I smell it, I can't smell anything out of it. The myrtle, that one has smell, but it has no taste. And the willow has neither taste nor any smell. Okay, so the idea is that these would represent the different types of man. That there's learning and there are good deeds. Some have one without the other. Some have neither. And the important is that we bring them all together and that we make them part of our community so that we can bring each of those people together and that they can grow and learn from one another. So traditionally what you would do is you come into the sukkah and you would wave these before the Lord, and we'll wave them up and down and eat left, right, east, west, north, south, all 6 directions, right? So what we're going to do then is we're going to have them in the 4 cardinal directions and up and down, and say a blessing about the waving of the lulav. And that much like the priest would wave the sacrifice before the Lord, that this is a representation of bounty and the ingathering of the species that would have been brought together at this season. So, Next, let me put this down. That's going to stay. Okay. Another traditional thing that you can do in the Sukkah is read Megillat Kohelet, in other words, Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes is traditional to read on Sukkot. The themes of this book talk about the futility of storing up earthly treasures at the same time that we're celebrating a festival of ingathering. It talks about the assurance of death and our fleeting nature on this earth while we're sitting in temporary dwellings. And the conclusion of the whole matter is to fear God and keep his commandments, for this is all of man. And we conclude the book with that statement. And we joyously celebrate a time when God will complete and fulfill the purpose of his creation on the last great day. So, there is another tradition to have guests in your sukkah, specifically ushpizin. Now, ushpizin is an Aramaic word that means guests, and it actually refers to, if you look into some liturgy on this day, it's not just any guests, where of course you want to invite your friends and family, have people over to enjoy with you. What you're going to find actually is that specifically those guests, we have one special one on each day, kind of like we would wait for Elijah at the Passover. On the first night, we ask for Abraham to come join us, then Isaac, then Jacob, then Joseph, then Moses, then Aaron, and then King David. Each night, a different guest enters the sukkah, and on all of the 8 nights, sorry, I'm getting into something else. So, split up my notes here. So each of those nights corresponds. So the idea is to bring in somebody, to bring in guests, to celebrate with one another, and to have your ushpizin, to have your guests. Now, let me... Okay. Couple fun things now. We're just going to go ahead and close up here at the last few bits of some fun things that I had in corresponding with Sukkot. So, one, there is a special ceremony that would take place on Sukkot. It's one of those we often forget about because it's not something that we can still do as part of the temple. It's hard to keep this one up. But specifically, this was the pouring out of the water. And let's see, let me find the actual name of it, because the Hebrew, let's see. Getting a lovely little glare. That's the fun part about doing this out in the sukkah. Yeah, the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water. And I'm going to come across it in my notes here in a little bit. So, on all 8 days of Sukkot, except on Shabbat, which was handled a little bit differently, water would be gathered in a golden pitcher from the pool of Shiloach, the Siloam, right? Brought down, it would be brought through the water gate, which was specifically named because of this ceremony where they would bring this through. They would, and they would return it to the courtyard of the temple. And they would sound the shofar with a tekiah, a teruah, and a tekiah. Okay, that's the boo, and then boop, 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 and then boo, woo. So it would be this expression of joy that they have. Now, the priest would ascend a ramp, turn to his left, and he would pour the water into one of 2 silver basins. Rabbi Yehuda said that they were actually limestone, but that they were blackened due to wine and looked like silver. Now, they were perforated on the bottom. One was for a wine libation, and the other, and that spout was wide. The other was for a water libation, and that spout was narrow, because the outflow of the liquids, because they have a different viscosity, they actually would pour out differently. But they adjusted the spouts so that they would pour out at the same time and go out evenly and together. The basin to the west was, the basin to the west of the altar was for water, and the basin to the east was for wine. However, Talmud says that if you pour into the wrong basin, it doesn't negate the libation, so that's good. Now, the water does have to be poured into the basin. This is kind of an interesting story. There's a story in the Mishnah that recounts a Sadducee priest that intentionally poured the water on his feet because the Sadducees did not accept the oral tradition of requiring a water libation at this time. And so when he did this and poured it on their feet in their rage, the crowd actually pelted him with their etrogs. So, now, this ceremony was such a big deal that people would dance with flaming torches. There were jugglers, says Mishnah. The people would sing songs. The Levites would play harps and lyres and cymbals and trumpets, tons of instruments, all kinds of different kinds. Mishnah says that one who did not see the celebration of the place of the drawing of water never saw celebration in his days. You ain't never seen a party if you haven't seen the water libation party, right? So the musicians would stand on the 15 stairs that correspond with the 15 Psalms of Ascents, and the Levites would stand with their instruments and would recite their songs. When the rooster crowed at dawn, they sounded the tekiah, the teruah, and the tekiah. When the water reached the 10th stair, they would sound it again. And when it reached the women's courtyard, they would sound it again. When they would exit the gate, they would sound them again. During the ceremony, there was a total of 48 trumpet blasts. And when they went through the gate, they would turn around, they would exit the east gate. Now, they would turn around, face west toward the Holy of Holies, and say, "Our ancestors who were in this place during the first temple period, who did not conduct themselves appropriately, stood with their backs to the sanctuary of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east." Ezekiel 8:16. And our eyes are to God. Our eyes are to God. Rabbi Yehuda says that they would repeat it and say, "We are to God, and our eyes are to God." Now, consider this whole ceremony, and let's talk about John chapter 7. Verse 2 says, "Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand." Yeshua is being pressed by his brothers. Come on, man, just make yourself known, right? They want him to not do this in secret anymore and just make himself known to the people. And he tells them, "My time has not yet come." That's John 7:6. He goes up to the feast after them in secret. So tells them to go. He doesn't go, and then he sneaks in. And the people were looking for him there, but no one spoke openly about him because they were afraid of the Jewish authorities. Perhaps now in John 7:14, it makes a reference to the midst of the feast, which means that Yeshua taught in the temple on maybe, I don't know, the 4th day, 5th day, which would have been Joseph's day of Ushpizin, or the might have been Moses if it was the 5th day. It would have been during his teaching on the Sabbath day that Yeshua says, "Yes, yet while I am still with you, and then go unto him that sent me. Ye shall seek me, and ye shall not find me. And where I am, thither ye shall not come." That's verse 33 and 34. Now, on the last day, this is verse 37 and 38. On the last day, the great day of the feast, Yeshua stood and cried, saying, "If any man thirst, let him come to me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." It's not super clear whether that's referring to day 7 or day 8. On the last day of the feast, if it were to put it that way, it might point a little bit more to day 7. To say the last day, the great day of the feast, kind of points to day 8. Now, that being said, though, that the last day of the feast technically was the 7th day because they were really feasting. That was when the 7 bulls and the 14 goats and the other lambs and rams were being sacrificed. There were only the 10 animals that were on the 8th day, right? Not nearly as many as on the other days. So it's kind of ambiguous. So consider whether these events might have happened in chapter 8 that would have been taking place on the day of the festival. Yeshua was confronting the crowd. And now we've got a loud... Gosh, that's close. We've got a
Very close plane.
really, really low flying plane. My goodness. Anyway, Yeshua was confronting the crowd, ready to stone the adulterous woman. This is the beginning of chapter 8, when it says, the next day. So we know that he made his proclamation about, if any thirst, let them come to me. That was on what was called the last day. So that's also, we definitely know, was taking place during the libation ceremonies, which is pretty cool. It's when he, in the morning, comes upon the crowd ready to stone the adulterous woman. And that's when he begins writing on the ground, right? Well, everyone in the world would love to know what he was writing on the ground there, but there are a couple clues and guesses and speculations. One I find very interesting. If you go and read in Jeremiah 17:13, it says, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth. For they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. So he has proclaimed himself the fountain of living water. He then starts writing in the dirt. Some translations say their names shall be written in the dust. Then, who knows? Maybe he was writing this verse. Maybe he was straight up writing their names in the dirt. Who knows? That'd be pretty wild too. Maybe he wrote something completely different. I don't know. But it is something worth considering, I think, that it's the beginning of this Jeremiah 17 passage, which begins, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, with a point of diamond. It is engraved on the tablet of their heart and on the horns of their altars. So perhaps with this echoing in their memories, it's this, when Yeshua says in John 7, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Okay, Judah, your sin is written with a pen of iron and a point of diamond engraved on the tablets of your heart. Are you really going to tell me that none of you is sinless? He might have been calling that out for them. Who knows? Those that might have actually had that in their hearts. Because it did. Something convicted them. Now, Mishnah also records that priests would pull threads and threads from their belts, and we would use them as wicks to light the not only the menorah, but also like many lamps and things that people would bring specifically for this event, and they would go around and they would light the candelabras. And it was said that this Mishnah says that the light was so bright that there was not a courtyard in Jerusalem that was not illuminated from the light of the place of the drawing of the water. So, I don't know, was it during this portion when Yeshua spoke to them in chapter 8:12 of John, saying, I am the light of the world. He that follow me that will not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Something to think about. Now, you might have heard that some people celebrate the birth of Christ at Sukkot. Now, there are a few things that kind of point to this, of course, not the least of which is John 1:14 that says the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. That word tabernacle very specifically pointing to the Sukkot. But as to whether he was actually born on this day is a little bit more ambiguous. Because there's a tradition that Elijah will return on Passover, combined with John the Immerser coming in the spirit of Elijah, some put his birth in correspondence with Passover, and that would put Yeshua's birth 6 months later, which would coincide with the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, since Sukkot was a pilgrimage festival that often coincided with the census, it's possible that they were in Bethlehem, near Jerusalem, and that the inns would have been very, very crowded. We don't know. Even the tradition of celebrating Christ's birth on December 25th may not be as much co-opting and as pagan as some people have thought, because really it might actually correspond to an old Jewish tradition that the righteous man lives out the full number of his years and dies on the anniversary of the day that he was born. The sort of Christian adaptation of this is not necessarily to die on the same day that you were born, but rather to die on the same day that you were conceived. And what that actually means then is that we know that if Yeshua died on the 14th of Nisan at Passover, that he would have been conceived on the 14th of Nisan at Passover. Someone did the math and found out that the year that he would have been conceived, 14th of Nisan of that year, would have been March 25th. 9 months later at his birth would have been December 25th. So that's kind of where however that all works out. I've also heard some really interesting teachings about being born on the 25th of the winter month, which would have been Kislev, which actually would have corresponded then with Hanukkah. And I've heard some really interesting things about that too. So people have different speculation as to when he might have been born. Now, here's a fun one. There's an anti-Christian text that exists among Jewish believers from the time, like, of the early century, first century, early second and third, really. Let me correct myself on that. It's called the Agadah de Shimon Kefa. Okay, the story about Shimon Kefa. The story is set in 60 AD, but it probably more closely reflects the trouble of Judaism and Christianity from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and what it used to look like trying to distinguish between Christianity and Judaism at the time, because it was really quite difficult for them to do. Now, the story alludes to a group of Christians who celebrated the death of Yeshua of Nazareth on the first of unleavened bread, the Ascension instead of Sukkot, and his birth on the first day of Sukkot, and his circumcision on the 8th day. Now, the story uses this as evidence to speak of how other people are stepping away from the true Judaism. But this also certainly does not describe the early Christians who celebrated Christ's birth nearer to the time of the winter solstice. So this text seems to be pointing to a time when a messianic sect of Judaism aligned the feast of days, the feast days, with specific events in Yeshua's life, which, I don't know, whether this means that he was actually born on Sukkot is still unclear, but it might be fair to say that the tradition of celebrating his birth at that time is an ancient event. So, all in all, this is one of those where we are meant to dwell, to join with each other, to rejoice, and there are all kinds of scripture as you're reading through this that says rejoice, 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 rejoice. All that we have been doing, proclaiming Messiah as King at Yom Teruah, asking for his forgiveness and his blood atonement at Yom Kippur, this is the party. This is the culmination of it all. This is us getting to come with the marriage supper and to have that final ingathering of the nations, of his people Israel, that we all might come together and join together and celebrate with him at one feast and just never even ever put it away. This is the one where we're all going to come up to Jerusalem to rejoice in him and to sacrifice to him and to know who is our God. So enjoy Chag Sukkot Sameach, and hope you guys have a really awesome feast. We'll see you next week to talk a little bit more about Shemini Atzeret as well as Simchat Torah.